Memory experts know how to study because they understand the way the brain learns new information. They know the secrets, the systems and techniques that work. They know how and when to review for long-term retention. Unfortunately, in school, they never teach us these systems. They teach us what to learn but never how. Over the years, scientists and psychologists have worked hard to understand the way the human brain learns and remembers. Take German psychologist and memory pioneer, Hermann Ebbinghaus for example. What he discovered is staggering. He diagrammed his findings in what is known as the forgetting curve. Have a look at the graph. Note that, after only 20 minutes we forget 42% of what we just learned, after 1 hour, 56%, after 1 day 67%, and after 1 week we forget 75% of what we learned. Can you relate? All you have to do is ask yourself how much you remember from school. If you're like most people, you crammed the night before a test to get a passing grade, then went on to forget what you studied shortly after. Sure, you remember bits and pieces, but most of what you learned is gone. What's the point? If our memory is like a leaky cup, you pour information in, and it leaks out a hole in the bottom, why bother in the first place? Well, if we're truly interested in learning something, we need to find a way to plug that hole. The 2 phases of memorization. Let's start by thinking about the memorization process in 2 phases, the initial learning phase, and the review phase. There are lots of awesome memory systems and techniques we can use to quicken the initial learning phase. Though they play an essential role in the accelerated learning, that's not where I want to focus at the moment. The initial phase is akin to pouring the liquid into the cup. We want to know how to plug the leak and stop the inevitable loss of that information. The answer lies in how and when we review. These are the most important factors in the memorization process. They determine how much and how long you will remember what you learn. Please don't take that lightly. How we execute the review phase is of paramount importance when it comes to long-term memorization. In fact, I think it's the most important component of all. Now, when you combine the review strategies you're about to learn with the various memory techniques, your ability to fully memorize information will skyrocket. The 3 memory buckets. Think of the human memory as consisting of 3 buckets or containers. There's a sensory memory bucket, a short-term memory bucket, and a long-term memory bucket. Sensory memory, information from our environment is collected by our senses and stored for a very short period of time in the sensory memory. We are not consciously aware of this information for good reason. We'd go crazy if we were simultaneously aware of all the information our senses deliver to the brain. Stop for a moment and pay attention to the sounds happening around you right now. You might hear wind, traffic, talking, etc. But you weren't conscious of those sounds until I asked you to pay attention to them. That's because your attention was on what you were reading. This is important to note. Enough attention needs to be paid to something in order for it to be moved from the sensory bucket into the short-term memory bucket. Without attention, information is quickly forgotten. This is why multitasking when you study does you more harm than good. You can't pay full attention to 2 things at the same time. Also, if you often find your attention interrupted by social media notifications, email, phone calls, noise, etc., be aware that your performance is being degraded because your attention is distracted. It's a good idea to set up your study environment to avoid those sorts of things. You have to pay attention to something in order to move it from sensory memory to short-term memory. That's all for today. This is part 1. In part 2, we will learn about the short-term memory, long-term memory, and the review phase.